The morning fog rolled across Norfolk Naval Base, a dense, gray blanket that muted the early sunlight and blurred the towering ships docked along the pier. The air carried the scent of salt water and diesel, mixed with the faint tang of mud churned up from the previous day's rigorous drills. Soldiers trudged through the wet terrain, boots squelching in thick puddles, faces streaked with sweat and grime. They were exhausted, some moving mechanically, others laughing weakly at private jokes whispered to stave off fatigue. Among them, a lone figure moved deliberately, her steps steady, her gaze alert. Evelyn Carter, wearing standard-issue fatigues with sleeves rolled up and hair tied tightly in a bun, appeared to blend into the returning units. To anyone glancing her way, she was just another officer making rounds. But in truth, Evelyn had a purpose far beyond casual observation. In less than a week, she would officially take command of the base as Rear Admiral Evelyn Carter, a position few imagined a woman could achieve with such determination. Today, however, she wanted no recognition, no ceremonial fanfare, no salutes. She wanted the raw truth of her future command, the soldiers, the challenges, the morale, without the gloss of protocol. Her boots sank slightly into the mud as she stepped off the paved walkway, moving closer to a group of soldiers struggling to carry crates of equipment back from the field. She bent down and lifted one crate, her strength hidden beneath the sleeve of her uniform. A few soldiers turned, surprised by the ease with which she managed the heavy load. "You've got this?" one of them asked, eyebrows raised. She gave a faint nod and continued without a word. Not far from her, Sergeant Daniel Brooks barked orders with habitual frustration. Daniel had been a career soldier for nearly a decade, a man respected for his discipline, but notorious for his bluntness. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, his uniform caked in mud, and his boots already covered in grime. He was trying to marshal a group of recruits back to the barracks when one of them tripped, sending a crate tumbling into the mud. Daniel cursed under his breath and lunged to steady the load, muttering, "You're going to get us all killed one day." Evelyn approached silently, assessing the chaos. Without hesitation, she crouched and helped steady the crate with her hands. "Here," she said calmly, shifting it so the recruit could lift it safely. Daniel looked up just in time to catch her face as a streak of mud from the fallen crate splashed across it. His eyes widened. "Hey, watch." But before he could finish, he lost his balance, and a rogue handful of mud landed squarely on Evelyn's cheek. Evelyn froze for a split second, the cold shock of the mud splattering against her skin. Then, almost imperceptibly, a smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. She didn't scold him. She didn't reveal her identity. Instead, she wiped her face with the back of her hand and said lightly, "Well, that's one way to introduce yourself." The soldiers nearby snickered, thinking it was just another moment of rough field humor. Daniel, mortified, laughed nervously and muttered, "Sorry. Rookie mistake." In truth, it was far from a mistake. Evelyn silently marked the encounter. Here was a soldier, confident and bold, but unaware of the weight of her own presence. This small, messy moment, she realized, was a perfect lens through which she could begin to understand her future team. It was raw, unfiltered, and real, a far cry from the carefully staged inspections she had witnessed at other bases. As the convoy of equipment and personnel moved toward the barracks, Evelyn trailed behind, watching intently. She observed how the soldiers interacted, noting the subtle hierarchies that weren't in any official chart. Some recruits deferred instinctively to certain peers, while others challenged authority in ways that could either spark innovation or cause chaos. She took mental notes on who seemed genuinely committed, who struggled, and who simply survived by avoiding responsibility. Daniel, still uneasy about the mud incident, couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about this woman. She moved with a quiet confidence, her posture relaxed yet commanding, her gaze scanning every movement with precision. Most officers he'd known either barked orders from a distance or micromanaged every detail. This one, he thought, was different. She didn't demand respect, she earned it silently. As the morning wore on, Evelyn joined the group assigned to clean the muddy training grounds. She knelt to pick up debris, hands cold and damp from the mud, and worked side by side with recruits and enlisted men alike. Conversations were sparse, but telling. Soldiers grumbled about outdated equipment, long hours, and the occasional arbitrary orders from distant superiors. Evelyn listened more than she spoke, soaking in every detail. She was learning what no report could tell her, the morale, frustrations, and unspoken bonds that kept this unit together. Daniel, caught between curiosity and suspicion, found himself glancing at her repeatedly. Every time she moved, she carried herself with quiet authority, yet she made no demands. It was a paradox he didn't understand. Normally, he would have dismissed an officer who didn't assert herself. But this woman's presence had a subtle weight, one that seemed to command attention without ever asking for it. By midday, the sun had broken through the fog, casting a pale light across the base. Soldiers paused to catch their breath, wiping sweat and mud from their faces. Evelyn stood slightly apart, surveying the scene. She thought about the days ahead, the inspection schedules, the operational challenges, the endless paperwork, but also the humans who made the base function. If she could earn their respect, truly understand their struggles, she knew she could make meaningful change. And yet, there was humor in it all. The memory of mud smearing her cheek earlier made her smile again. It was a reminder that no matter the rank, no matter the title, leadership often began in the most unexpected and messy moments. This single act, small and chaotic, would later serve as a metaphor for the humility she intended to bring to her command. As the afternoon drills began, Daniel's unit prepared for a navigation exercise across the base's muddy terrain. Evelyn joined them, observing quietly from the sidelines, occasionally stepping in to assist without drawing attention to herself. Daniel noticed her again, now more than just a rookie officer, but he still didn't know her identity. He muttered to a fellow soldier, "There's something about her. Not like the others." By the end of the day, exhaustion weighed heavily on the troops. Mud-caked uniforms clung to tired bodies. Boots squelched with every step, and hands were raw from work. Evelyn moved among them, offering encouragement where needed, silently noting strengths and weaknesses, and subtly correcting mistakes without ever raising her voice. In this unassuming way, she began earning the trust of the very soldiers who would soon serve under her command. As night fell, the base quieted. Soldiers returned to their barracks, some laughing quietly, some lost in thought. Daniel, walking past the training grounds one last time, caught sight of Evelyn standing alone, gazing at the darkened pier where ships rocked gently in the harbor. For the first time, he felt a mixture of curiosity, respect, and unease. He didn't yet know who she was, but he sensed that this encounter, simple as it had been, would leave a lasting mark, not just on him, but on the base itself. Evelyn, meanwhile, reflected on her first day among the soldiers. The mud on her face had been washed away, but its meaning remained. Leadership, she realized, began in humility and understanding. It began not in ceremonies or titles, but in shared labor, shared struggle, and shared humanity. Tomorrow, she would continue her observation, learning more about her future crew, preparing to lead not as a distant commander, but as someone who truly understood the people she would serve. As she turned to leave the training grounds, she caught a glimpse of Daniel looking back at her one last time, curiosity etched into his face. Little did he know, the woman he had smeared with mud that morning would soon be his commanding officer, the incoming Rear Admiral of Norfolk Naval Base. and a figure whose presence would forever change the course of his career. The sun rose over Norfolk Naval Base, casting a golden glow on the sprawling complex. Evelyn Carter, still in plain fatigues, had already been moving among the soldiers for hours. The fog from the previous day had lifted, revealing mud-streaked paths, worn equipment, and the visible fatigue etched on the faces of her troops. She had slept only a few hours in a small room, borrowed from a junior officer, yet the day's tasks demanded her energy, vigilance, and undivided attention. She was determined to understand her soldiers, not as reports, not as briefings, but as living, breathing people. Evelyn approached Sergeant Daniel Brooks, who was pacing near the edge of a training yard, clipboard in hand, barking orders to a group of recruits struggling to assemble temporary barricades. Daniel had barely slept himself, his jaw tight, eyes scanning constantly for mistakes. Evelyn watched silently, noting his methods, strict but efficient, commanding but fair. She understood immediately why he had earned respect among his men, yet she also saw the subtle tension that came from his frustration with outdated procedures and limited resources. "Sergeant Brooks," Evelyn said lightly, stepping into view. Daniel glanced up, startled. He didn't recognize her immediately. The mud from yesterday had long been washed away, replaced by a confident but unassuming demeanor. "Yes, ma'am?" Daniel said, his tone professional but wary. "I was hoping you could show me how your unit handles barricade setup under time constraints," she said, her voice calm, measured. She did not introduce herself as the incoming Rear Admiral. That information would remain her secret for now. Daniel hesitated, unsure whether to take her seriously. Well, we usually—" he began, but Evelyn interrupted, kneeling to adjust a recruit's incorrectly placed post. "Let me help," she offered, her hands moving deftly. She lifted a heavy sandbag, positioning it with ease that belied her appearance. Daniel's eyes widened. He'd handled many officers in his career, but few, if any, had demonstrated such skill without making a show of it. As the day progressed, Evelyn moved seamlessly among the recruits and enlisted soldiers. She corrected mistakes subtly, encouraged hesitant trainees, and noticed patterns of inefficiency that no official report would ever reveal. She observed who volunteered to take initiative, who deferred responsibility, and who quietly endured without complaint. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle she would later use to rebuild morale and efficiency across the base. Daniel found himself increasingly distracted by her presence. She wasn't demanding respect. She wasn't asserting authority with words. And yet, somehow, she commanded it. He muttered under his breath, "What is she?" "She's good, but I can't place her. Something about her feels different." The recruits, oblivious to the true identity of the mysterious officer, began to respond positively to her presence. Where Daniel's words could sometimes be met with quiet grumbling, Evelyn's subtle guidance sparked cooperation. She helped one young sailor position a heavy crate, praised another for double-checking a measurement, and quietly reprimanded a third for rushing recklessly. Her actions demonstrated competence, fairness, and leadership, and her modesty made it all the more remarkable. During a brief lunch break, Evelyn joined the soldiers at the edge of the training yard. She sat on a crate, balancing a simple meal in her hands, and listened. Soldiers complained about long hours, understaffed departments, and equipment failures. Evelyn said little, nodding occasionally, asking quiet, clarifying questions. She discovered stories of personal sacrifice, single parents balancing duty with family, young recruits struggling with homesickness, experienced soldiers frustrated by bureaucratic inefficiencies. Daniel, sitting nearby, watched her interact with the group. He noticed that she wasn't just listening. She was remembering details, names, ranks, past mistakes, and even small personal challenges. It was unusual, and he couldn't help but admire it. He leaned toward a fellow sergeant and whispered, "There's something about her. She's paying attention. More than anyone else I've seen in a long time." As the afternoon wore on, Evelyn led the soldiers through a series of exercises designed to test coordination, strength, and endurance. She participated alongside them, lifting, running, and giving guidance as needed. Her energy was remarkable, and her hands-on approach inspired the group. Soldiers who had previously doubted themselves began to push harder, encouraged by her example. Daniel's respect deepened, but he also felt a strange tension. He still didn't know who she was. Each time he looked her way, a mix of admiration and frustration churned inside him. She was competent, confident, and unyielding in her focus, yet she carried herself without ego. She didn't demand deference. She earned it quietly. By mid-afternoon, Evelyn noticed a recurring problem in the unit's approach to barricade setup. Some soldiers were overcompensating for weak points, while others relied too heavily on their teammates. She called everyone together and demonstrated an alternative method, simple, efficient, and practical. She explained each step clearly, encouraging soldiers to ask questions and experiment with adjustments. Her approach was collaborative, not authoritarian, and it worked. Within minutes, the barricade was stronger, more resilient, and faster to construct. Daniel couldn't hide his amazement. Where'd she learn that? He muttered under his breath. He had trained many officers, but few had the combination of practical skill, clear thinking, and calm leadership. He watched her interact with the recruits, noting how she motivated without shouting, corrected without belittling, and commanded respect without imposing fear. As evening approached, the soldiers began cleaning up the training grounds. Mud and sweat-stained uniforms were scrubbed, equipment packed, and tired bodies stretched. Evelyn moved among them, offering encouragement, joking quietly, and lending a hand where needed. The recruits, initially wary, now looked to her as a source of guidance and inspiration. They didn't know her rank, but they felt her authority. Daniel finally approached her, unable to resist curiosity any longer. "Listen, you're good. Really good. But I can't figure out your background. You've got experience written all over you. How long have you been in?" Evelyn smiled faintly, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Long enough to know what works and what doesn't," she replied. No more. She didn't reveal her identity, not yet. The moment was too precious. She wanted him to see her as a soldier, not as the incoming Admiral. As night fell, Evelyn walked toward the barracks. The base was quiet now, except for the occasional shuffle of boots on the muddy paths and the distant hum of ship engines. Daniel lingered, watching her retreating figure. He still felt the same mix of confusion, admiration, and unease. Something about this woman, her energy, her insight, her humility, was different. She didn't fit any mold he had known, and it left him unsettled in the most compelling way. Evelyn paused at the edge of the pier, looking out at the harbor. The water reflected the fading light, and she thought about the day. She had observed, participated, and learned. She had seen strengths, weaknesses, morale issues, and untapped potential. Most importantly, she had experienced the human side of her command, the fatigue, frustration, humor, and resilience of the soldiers she would soon lead. She reflected on the mud smear from the previous day. A small, chaotic moment that had revealed more about leadership than any report or lecture ever could. Leadership, she thought, wasn't about rank or authority. It was about presence, understanding, courage, and humility. That mud-streaked cheek had reminded her that respect had to be earned, not demanded. Daniel, walking back to his own quarters, replayed the day in his mind. Every time he thought of her, a mixture of embarrassment and awe washed over him. He still didn't know who she was, but he knew one thing. He would never forget the officer who had worked alongside him, who had commanded silently, and who had challenged everything he thought he knew about leadership. Evelyn, finally settling into her modest room for a few hours of rest, reflected on the upcoming week. Tomorrow, she would continue her observation, focusing on drills, routines, and interpersonal dynamics. Each detail would be critical for understanding her command and for building a team that could function efficiently, cohesively, and with pride. As she closed her eyes, she remembered one guiding principle. Leadership was not about titles. It was about action, presence, and earning the trust of those you led, sometimes in the mud, sometimes in chaos, and often in the smallest, most unexpected moments. She smiled, thinking of Daniel Brooks, the sergeant who had smeared mud on her face, unaware that she would soon become his commanding officer. And so, the stage was set. A new day would bring challenges, lessons, and revelations. The story of the Mud Admiral had only just begun, and neither Daniel nor the rest of the base would ever forget the lessons hidden in humility, hard work, and unexpected encounters. The morning sun glinted off the steel-gray hulls of the ships docked at Norfolk Naval Base, casting long shadows across the muddy grounds. Evelyn Carter walked briskly along the pier, her boots sinking slightly into soft mud from the previous day's storm. The air was heavy with humidity, carrying a salty tongue from the harbor. The base was awakening, engines humming, sailors shouting, and the distant sound of drills echoing across the docks. Evelyn's eyes scanned every movement, every expression, every nuance. She was no longer merely observing. She was learning, absorbing the pulse of her command. Rumors had begun to swirl overnight. Soldiers whispered in the mess hall, along the pier, and near the training grounds. A new admiral was arriving soon, one who was reputed to be different from any other. Some said she was strict, uncompromising, and ruthless in her reform efforts. Others claimed she was fair, insightful, and capable of inspiring soldiers in ways no rank ever could. Evelyn listened silently as she moved among the groups, careful not to reveal herself. The contrast between rumor and reality intrigued her. She wanted to see not what people imagined, but what they believed, and how that shaped their behavior. Daniel Brooks, still haunted by the memory of smearing mud across the mysterious officer's face, walked alongside his unit. His boots were worn, uniform muddied again from early drills, and his expression a mixture of fatigue and frustration. "I swear, if this admiral is anything like the last one," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. One of the younger recruits laughed nervously, trying to hide his own tension. The mere thought of an incoming commander had everyone on edge, unsure what changes might arrive with her. Evelyn, in the guise of a mid-level officer, moved through the mess hall unnoticed. Soldiers glanced at her occasionally, but assumed she was part of the support staff or a visiting officer conducting routine checks. She sat quietly at a corner table, listening to snippets of conversation. One recruit complained about outdated navigation equipment. Another voiced frustration at long hours and insufficient rest. She took mental notes, her pen scratching quietly on a small notebook. The grievances were neither minor nor insurmountable, but they revealed the human side of command, the emotional and psychological weight carried by each soldier. Later, Evelyn joined a small training exercise along the dockside. The unit was practicing quick deployments onto boats, simulating emergency scenarios in rough waters. Daniel led the drill, barking commands, correcting mistakes, and pushing his team to their limits. Evelyn observed silently from the sidelines, occasionally stepping in to correct posture or demonstrate technique. She moved with precision, never overstepping authority, but every motion carried confidence and competence. Soldiers began noticing her. "She knows her stuff," one muttered to a friend, eyes wide in surprise. Daniel's frustration mixed with fascination. He couldn't understand why this officer, whom he still didn't recognize, was so effective, yet so unassuming. "She's different," he admitted quietly, almost to himself. "Not the kind of officer I expected to see here." Every command she gave, every correction she offered, carried weight without ever demanding attention. He realized, reluctantly, that she had already begun earning respect, silently, subtly, without any formal title. By midday, Evelyn found herself walking toward the heart of the base, past rows of barracks and training fields. Soldiers stopped and saluted routinely, but she returned nods without ceremony. Her goal was observation, and she wanted nothing to interfere with authenticity. She paused at a small courtyard where groups of enlisted personnel gathered for informal conversations. Whispers about the new Admiral grew louder here. "She's coming from the Pacific Fleet, I heard," one sailor said. "They say she turned a failing squadron into one of the best. She's a woman, right? How's she going to handle the men here?" Another replied skeptically, "We're rough, demanding, and not exactly the easiest to manage." Evelyn's lips twitched in the faintest smile. These were the perceptions she wanted to challenge. Leadership wasn't about gender, rumors, or expectations. It was about understanding, respect, and courage. Every whispered doubt, every skeptical glance, was a piece of the puzzle. She had to see who would rise to the occasion, and who would crumble under pressure once she assumed command. As afternoon approached, clouds began to gather along the horizon. The sky darkened subtly, an unusual early storm warning. Evelyn noticed the shift in the air immediately, the change in wind, the subtle drop in temperature, and the tension in the soldiers' movements. The weather mirrored the growing uncertainty among her troops. Storms were dangerous in more than one sense. They tested not only physical skill, but mental fortitude and cohesion under pressure. Daniel's unit gathered near the training yard, preparing for the next exercise, a timed navigation drill in pairs, requiring coordination and precise execution. Daniel paced nervously, scowling at minor mistakes and urging his soldiers to push harder. Evelyn moved among them, her eyes scanning every detail, silently noting strengths and weaknesses. She noticed a young recruit hesitating, uncertain how to follow the protocol. Evelyn stepped close, demonstrating the correct procedure without drawing attention to herself. The recruit's face lit up with understanding, and he executed flawlessly. Daniel's jaw tightened. He couldn't deny her effectiveness, even if he didn't yet know why she impressed him so much. The storm arrived with little warning. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, turning the mud into slick, treacherous terrain. Wind gusts lashed at the barracks and the dock, and distant thunder rumbled ominously. Soldiers scrambled for shelter, shouting over the roar of the storm. Evelyn, standing in the open yard, observed calmly. She knew this was a test, not of physical skill, but of leadership, resilience, and quick thinking under pressure. Daniel barked orders as water began to seep into the lower yards. He moved like a man possessed, directing soldiers to secure equipment and help recruits find cover. Yet even in the chaos, he couldn't shake the image of the mysterious officer who had seamlessly led exercises earlier. He searched the yard, hoping for guidance, only to find her already assisting a small group of struggling recruits, directing them with precision and care. His respect deepened, mixed now with a sense of challenge. Who was this woman? How was she so composed amidst the storm? Evelyn moved among the soldiers, assessing the unfolding crisis. She coordinated teams to stabilize equipment, guided recruits to safety, and ensured no one was left vulnerable. Her presence was calm, authoritative, yet unassuming, a rare combination that quietly commanded attention without demanding it. Every decision was deliberate, practical, and efficient. Soldiers began to follow her lead instinctively, as though her competence had become the anchor in the midst of chaos. As the storm intensified, Evelyn noticed that a section of the training yard was flooding rapidly. She signaled to Daniel, who initially hesitated but quickly realized her plan. Together, they directed a rescue of a group of recruits trapped behind a fallen barricade. Evelyn's actions were swift, calculated, and courageous. She lifted debris, coordinated positions, and ensured everyone was safe. Daniel watched, awe-struck and slightly embarrassed that he had doubted her capabilities moments before. By late afternoon, the storm had passed, leaving the base drenched but largely intact. Mud clung to every surface, but the soldiers were safe. Evelyn walked among them, checking injuries, offering quiet words of encouragement, and observing reactions. Daniel, exhausted but impressed, finally approached her. His uniform was soaked, mud streaking his boots and sleeves, but his expression was a mix of respect and disbelief. You handled that better than anyone I've seen," he admitted, voice low. "I don't know who you are, but you're something else." Evelyn smiled faintly, brushing rain-soaked hair from her face. "It's not about me," she replied calmly. "It's about keeping everyone safe and doing what's right." Her words, simple as they were, carried weight far beyond their length. The soldiers, gathering around, looked to her as a source of calm and guidance. They didn't know her true identity, but her leadership had already begun to leave a mark. Daniel, still grappling with his own awe, realized that this woman had earned respect without title, without ceremony, without recognition, simply through action, competence, and presence. Evelyn paused at the edge of the yard, looking out toward the ships swaying gently in the post-storm harbor. She thought about the coming days, the challenges, and the opportunities to strengthen her unit. Leadership, she reflected, was tested not in calm, orderly moments, but in chaos, uncertainty, and human frailty. Today had been a test, and she had seen both strengths and weaknesses among the soldiers, as well as her own. Daniel lingered a few steps behind, watching silently. He could no longer dismiss her as just another officer. Her calm authority, her competence, her humility, it all defied expectation. For the first time, he felt a mixture of awe and apprehension. Whoever she was, Daniel realized, she was going to change everything about the way this base operated, and perhaps the way he himself approached leadership. Evelyn turned back toward the barracks, her silhouette sharp against the fading light. The base, still reeling from the storm, was a living lesson, not just in strategy or skill, but in human resilience, trust, and leadership. She had seen how her soldiers responded under pressure, how they relied on one another, and how she could guide them without asserting formal authority. And in the corner of her mind, the memory of mud smeared across her face surfaced again, a reminder that leadership begins in the most unexpected moments, in humility, and in shared struggle. The storm had revealed truths that no drill or report ever could. Tomorrow, the real work would continue, and Evelyn would continue her quiet observation, preparing to transform not just a unit, but the culture of the base itself. By mid-morning, the storm that had been brewing on the horizon finally arrived in full force. The sky darkened to a bruised gray, clouds roiling ominously above Norfolk Naval Base. Rain fell in sheets, lashing the muddy ground and turning the training yards into treacherous swamps. The wind tore through the docked ships, snapping flags and whipping tarps into the air. Soldiers scrambled, shouting over the roar, struggling to secure equipment, assist recruits, and prevent injuries. It was chaos, the kind of test that revealed true character, and Evelyn Carter thrived in it. Evelyn had been observing the early signs of the storm and its effect on the base. When the first gusts bent poles and flooded low-lying areas, she didn't panic. Instead, she moved decisively, her calm demeanor cutting through the noise like a beacon. Soldiers turned instinctively to her for guidance, even though they didn't know her rank. She was already in the middle of coordinating a response, giving concise orders, and positioning personnel to stabilize the worst-hit areas. Sergeant Daniel Brooks barked his own orders, rushing to direct a group securing tents and supplies near the pier. Mud clung to his boots as he slipped, narrowly catching himself on a crate. He barked again, frustrated, trying to maintain control. Despite his usual authority, the storm had stripped him of some confidence. Then he saw her, the unknown officer he had smeared with mud just days ago, moving calmly, methodically, and with a clarity he hadn't seen before. "Move the crates to the high ground," she shouted over the wind, gesturing toward a safer location. "Watch each other, don't rush, but don't hesitate." Daniel paused, momentarily stunned. Her voice was firm, yet not harsh. She was directing without belittling, commanding without shouting. Her soldiers responded immediately, falling into formation under her subtle leadership. Daniel realized, reluctantly, that she was already in control, not because of rank, but because she inspired trust. The floodwaters rose quickly, sweeping away unsecured supplies and threatening to trap some of the younger recruits near the dock. Evelyn noticed a small group huddled together, their movements panicked. She sprinted toward them, slipping in the mud, but maintaining her balance. With precise, decisive movements, she directed the group to safer ground, guiding each recruit individually. One young sailor stumbled, slipping into the water, and Evelyn reached in, grabbing him by the wrist and pulling him back to safety. Daniel ran alongside her, trying to assist, but he was uncoordinated, overwhelmed by the chaos. He watched in awe as Evelyn moved with effortless authority, her hands strong, her judgment impeccable, her presence calming the frightened recruits. He realized he had underestimated her completely. She wasn't just competent, she was extraordinary. Meanwhile, other sections of the base were experiencing structural damage. Barricades collapsed under the weight of the storm, and unsecured equipment threatened to injure soldiers. Evelyn moved among the groups, delegating tasks and offering guidance. She instructed one team to anchor a series of crates using ropes, showing them how to distribute weight evenly to prevent collapse. Another team was guided to reinforce a compromised temporary shelter. Every decision was strategic, efficient, and focused on safety, and yet delivered without any hint of ego. Daniel's unit began to mirror her composure. Where there had been panic, now there was order. Where there had been hesitation, there was swift action. Daniel himself felt a strange humility as he watched her lead, the same woman whose face he had wiped clean of mud only a few days earlier. He thought back to that moment and smiled ruefully. It seemed insignificant now compared to the courage and skill she was demonstrating. Rain lashed harder, and thunder rolled across the harbor, shaking the ground. A strong gust knocked over a crate of equipment near the pier. Evelyn immediately sprinted toward it, assessing the situation in an instant. She directed nearby soldiers to secure loose ropes and lifted a heavy crate herself, positioning it to prevent it from sliding into the water. Daniel tried to assist, but she waved him aside, signaling that she had it under control. Her confidence wasn't arrogance. It was assurance grounded in experience and preparation. The storm tested not just skill, but endurance. Soldiers were soaked to the bone, hands raw from gripping wet ropes, muscles straining in the mud. Evelyn worked alongside them, encouraging and correcting as needed. She moved quickly, efficiently, yet never hurried. Every action was deliberate, every command measured. Her presence became the anchor amid the chaos, giving the soldiers a focus point in the swirling uncertainty. One particularly treacherous area involved a partially collapsed dockside storage shed. The structure groaned under the storm, threatening to collapse completely. Evelyn assessed the situation instantly. She instructed Daniel to organize a human chain, moving supplies from the shed to safer ground. She positioned herself strategically, lifting heavy objects and directing movements. Soldiers followed her every command, inspired by her example and reassured by her composure. The dangerous section was secured without injury. By late afternoon, the storm began to relent, though the base remained soaked and battered. Mud covered every surface, supplies were displaced, and soldiers were exhausted. Evelyn walked among them, checking for injuries, offering words of encouragement, and ensuring that even the smallest tasks were completed safely. She noticed recruits supporting one another, a sense of camaraderie strengthened by shared struggle. She smiled faintly. Leadership, she thought, wasn't about authority alone. It was about fostering resilience, trust, and unity, especially in the toughest moments. Daniel finally approached her, drenched, mud-smeared, and panting. His expression was a mixture of admiration, disbelief, and humility. I don't know what to say, he admitted. You handled that flawlessly. I've never seen anyone do what you just did. Evelyn met his gaze calmly, her eyes sharp but kind. It's not about me, she said simply. It's about the team. Everyone has a role. You all did well because you trusted one another, and you trusted yourself. Her words were quiet, yet they carried more authority than any shouting command could have. Daniel's respect deepened immeasurably. He realized that this woman, this officer, this unknown leader, was teaching him something he hadn't learned in years of service. Leadership was action, not position. The soldiers began to gather, sharing stories of what had happened during the storm. Some laughed nervously about minor mistakes. Others commended their peers for quick thinking. Daniel observed how the group dynamics had subtly shifted. Fear had been replaced with pride, chaos with order, uncertainty with confidence. Evelyn had not just managed a crisis. She had transformed the morale of the entire base. As evening approached, the sun broke through the clouds in streaks of gold and orange, illuminating the mud-slicked yards and battered ships. Evelyn stood quietly at the edge of the main yard, surveying the aftermath. The base had survived, thanks largely to her guidance, courage, and calm leadership. She allowed herself a brief moment to reflect on the day, considering the challenges she had observed, the strengths she had noted, and the weaknesses she would address in the coming weeks. Daniel lingered nearby, watching her. He was drenched, exhausted, and humbled. For the first time, he realized that the woman he had casually smeared mud across was not only capable, but extraordinary. She had led through action, through example, through courage, not through rank, not through intimidation, but through skill, empathy, and presence. The storm had tested everyone, the soldiers, the recruits, and even Daniel himself, but it had also revealed truths about leadership, resilience, and trust. Evelyn's approach had been a masterclass in quiet authority, practical skill, and human understanding. She had earned respect in the most organic way possible, and Daniel knew, without a doubt, that she was someone remarkable. As the soldiers returned to their barracks, exhausted and soaked, Daniel reflected on what had happened. He thought back to the small, chaotic moment when he had smeared mud on her face. At the time, it had seemed like a joke, a minor incident. Now, he saw it in a completely different light. That same woman had saved recruits, managed chaos, and inspired an entire unit to act with courage and precision. He had underestimated her completely. Evelyn, meanwhile, paused at the edge of the pier once more. The harbor reflected the fading light, ships swaying gently, mud drying on the edges of the training yard. She reflected quietly, thinking about the lessons of the day. Leadership, she knew, was tested not in calm or routine, but in crisis, in moments of fear, uncertainty, and challenge. Today had been a test, and the results had been clear. Courage, competence, and humility mattered more than rank, and respect was earned through action, not title. Daniel watched her leave, still in awe. He could no longer think of her as just another officer. She was extraordinary, and he knew deep down that her arrival would change the entire base forever. The story of the storm, the mud, and the unknown officer had only just begun. The morning sun filtered weakly through the dissipating storm clouds, casting a pale, silvery light across Norfolk Naval Base. The previous day's chaos had left its mark. Mud-streaked equipment, waterlogged tents, and exhausted soldiers sprawled across training fields. Yet, amidst the mess, there was a quiet hum of anticipation. Today was the day the base would officially welcome its new commanding officer, the rumored Admiral, whose reputation preceded her. Soldiers whispered eagerly in the mess hall, recounting tales of her effectiveness, some recalling the storm from yesterday with a mix of awe and disbelief. Sergeant Daniel Brooks stood among the ranks, uniform slightly damp, hair sticking to his forehead, and a lingering trace of yesterday's mud still clinging stubbornly to his boots. He felt a strange tension in his chest, excitement, curiosity, and surprisingly, a touch of fear. After all, he had no idea that the officer who had demonstrated such competence during the storm, the one who had worked alongside him and his men, would be the very person stepping out of the ceremonial car today. The base was buzzing with activity. Soldiers lined the parade grounds, standing at attention, eyes forward. Officers in dress uniforms walked briskly, inspecting ranks, while recruits fidgeted nervously, adjusting caps and checking boots. The wind carried the faint scent of damp mud and salt water, reminders of the storm's recent passage. Daniel's mind wandered back to the mysterious officer he had encountered just a few days ago, the one who had commanded attention without ever asserting authority, who had saved recruits with calm precision, and who had earned his unspoken respect in mere hours. A hush fell across the parade ground as a sleek black vehicle rolled to a stop at the center. The soldiers snapped to attention, eyes wide, necks craned. Daniel's heart thumped in his chest. From the car stepped a woman in immaculate dress uniform, crisp, authoritative, radiating a presence that demanded attention. She moved with the same calm confidence he had observed on the training grounds, but now every motion carried the weight of rank, of command. His breath caught. Evelyn Carter. Daniel's eyes widened in shock. The woman he had smeared with mud, the officer he had watched navigate chaos with unmatched skill, the one who had quietly earned the respect of everyone she touched. She was the new Rear Admiral. For a split second, he felt a mix of disbelief, embarrassment, and awe. His mind raced back to yesterday, to the storm, to the way she had moved with such authority without ever asserting her rank. He had laughed at her, underestimated her, and yet here she was, the very leader who would now guide the base. Evelyn's gaze swept the parade ground, landing briefly on Daniel. A faint, knowing smile played on her lips. She approached the microphone at the podium, her voice calm, clear, and resonant. "Good morning, Norfolk Naval Base," she began. "It is an honor to serve as your new Rear Admiral. I am here not just as a leader, but as a member of this team, to understand, to guide, and to work alongside each of you." Her words carried authority, yet they were not imposing. They were inclusive, inspiring, and filled with a subtle warmth that commanded respect. Daniel could hardly believe what he was hearing. His hands clenched at his sides, a mix of embarrassment and admiration flooding him. The memory of mud streaking her face came sharply to mind, and he couldn't help but chuckle under his breath. The juxtaposition of that messy, chaotic moment with his ceremonial, commanding presence was almost surreal. Evelyn continued, addressing the assembled soldiers. "I have spent the past few days observing your drills, working alongside you, and learning the strengths and challenges of this base. I have seen courage, ingenuity, and dedication in action, and I have also seen areas where we can grow together. My goal is to build a team that is not only efficient and disciplined, but resilient, united, and proud of what we achieve together. Daniel, still processing the revelation, glanced around. The soldiers' reactions were a mix of awe, admiration, and laughter. Some whispered to one another, recalling the storm and how the unknown officer had seemingly appeared out of nowhere, directing everyone with unmatched skill. Others marveled at the humility she had displayed during those difficult moments, now amplified by the revelation of her rank. Then came the moment of light-hearted recognition. Evelyn's eyes landed squarely on Daniel. She smiled, an almost teasing glint in her gaze, and said, "Sergeant Brooks, I believe you had a hand in introducing me to the mud during my first visit." The crowd erupted into laughter, many soldiers shaking their heads in amusement. Daniel's face turned crimson. He stammered, Yes, ma'am. I apologize, ma'am." Evelyn chuckled softly. No need for apologies. In fact, it was a memorable introduction. It reminded me that leadership begins not with titles, but with shared experience, humility, and understanding the people you serve. Sergeant Brooks, consider yourself officially forgiven. Daniel exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and embarrassment washing over him. He couldn't believe it. The very woman he had humiliated with a smear of mud had just displayed incredible grace, humor, and leadership in front of the entire base. He felt a deep sense of respect, tinged with awe, and a newfound motivation to rise to the standards she embodied. Evelyn turned her attention back to the assembly. "I am here not to command from afar, but to lead with you, learn with you, and ensure that this base thrives in every sense, operationally, morally, and personally. Together, we will face challenges, overcome obstacles, and strengthen not just our skills, but our bonds as a team. Leadership is earned, respect is mutual, and courage is proven in action, not by rank, but by dedication and integrity." Her words resonated deeply with the soldiers. They had witnessed her in action, in mud and storm, and now they understood the truth. Their new Rear Admiral was not only capable, but exceptional. She had earned their respect through deeds, not speeches, and she had demonstrated humility, bravery, and insight at every turn. The revelation of her identity did not diminish the admiration they had developed. It magnified it. Daniel, still processing, reflected on the storm, the drills, and the countless small moments in which Evelyn had led silently but effectively. He realized that leadership was not about ego or intimidation. It was about presence, action, and connecting with those around you. He silently vowed to learn from her, to emulate her example, and to support her vision for the base with everything he had. As the ceremony concluded, Evelyn walked among the ranks, greeting soldiers individually, offering quiet words of encouragement, and acknowledging their efforts. Daniel watched, still in awe, as she moved with the same humility and grace she had displayed during the storm. She spoke with each soldier personally, asking questions, listening attentively, and making notes in her mind, not for evaluation, but for understanding. By the end of the day, the story of Evelyn's identity had spread throughout the base. Soldiers recounted tales of the storm, of the officer who had guided them with unmatched skill and calm authority, and of the dramatic reveal during the ceremony. Daniel found himself telling the story again and again, each retelling underscoring the lesson he had learned. Leadership is not about title or appearance. It is about courage, humility, and action in the moment when it matters most. As evening approached, the base settled into a quieter rhythm. Soldiers reflected on the day's events, many inspired to work harder, support one another, and take pride in their unit. Daniel, sitting quietly in the barracks, thought back to that first, messy encounter with Evelyn, the mud smeared across her face, the chaotic drills, and her calm, commanding presence. He realized that the moment that had seemed insignificant had been a foreshadowing of the extraordinary leadership he was now witnessing. Evelyn, in her private quarters, reviewed the day and considered the challenges ahead. The storm had revealed strengths and weaknesses alike, and she had seen firsthand the potential of her unit. She reflected on Sergeant Brooks, remembering the way he had reacted under pressure, his courage, and his determination to improve. She smiled faintly, knowing that moments of humility, shared struggle, and unexpected challenges would continue to shape the soldiers under her command. The day had ended with laughter, respect, and reflection. The legend of the Mud Admiral was born, a tale that would inspire soldiers for years to come. The incident with Sergeant Brooks was no longer embarrassing. It was symbolic of the leadership she embodied, accessible, courageous, and earned through action rather than assumed authority. For Daniel, the revelation marked a turning point. He now saw Evelyn not just as a leader, but as a mentor, a figure whose example would guide him in his own growth. He understood that true leadership required humility, courage, and the ability to connect with people in both ordinary and extraordinary moments. The woman he had underestimated had become the standard against which he would measure his own actions. Evelyn stood at the edge of the parade ground as the last soldiers dispersed, her gaze sweeping the base. The day had been a success, not because of ceremony or rank, but because of action, respect, and shared effort. She had earned the loyalty of her unit, inspired courage, and demonstrated that leadership was most effective when grounded in empathy, skill, and humility. As darkness fell over Norfolk Naval Base, Daniel Brooks walked to his quarters, replaying the events in his mind. The memory of mud smeared across her face, once a moment of awkward humor, now symbolized the beginning of a journey. For him, for the soldiers, and for the base itself. Evelyn Carter's arrival had changed everything, and he knew that the story of the Mud Admiral was only beginning. The morning air at Norfolk Naval Base was crisp and alive with possibility. Evelyn Carter walked through the parade ground, her dress uniform impeccable, yet her presence approachable. The aftermath of the storm had left mud streaked along the edges of the training fields, but it also left behind a team forged in shared adversity. Soldiers moved with purpose, their earlier apprehension replaced by renewed energy and determination. Evelyn could feel it. The base was no longer simply a collection of individuals. It was beginning to function as a unit. Her first priority was to address morale and cohesion, areas that had suffered during months of routine drills, bureaucratic inefficiency, and minor grievances. Evelyn believed that a strong unit depended not only on skill, but also on trust, camaraderie, and respect. She gathered her key leaders, including Sergeant Daniel Brooks, for a morning briefing in one of the larger barracks. "Good morning," Evelyn began, her voice calm yet commanding. "Yesterday tested everyone. You faced a storm, mud, and chaos. Some of you performed admirably. Others struggled. Today, we build on that. Not just skills, but trust. Not just drills, but teamwork. Leadership is not a title. It is action, guidance, and example. We'll work together to strengthen every aspect of this unit." Daniel listened intently, still in awe of the woman who had gone from muddy anonymity to commanding authority. He felt a surge of respect and a renewed determination to rise to her expectations. He realized that leadership wasn't about ego or rank. It was about inspiring people to do their best, and Evelyn was already a master at it. The first exercise of the day was designed to test collaboration under pressure. Evelyn split the soldiers into mixed teams, assigning tasks that required both physical endurance and strategic thinking. Some teams were tasked with moving heavy equipment across muddy terrain. Others needed to solve logistical challenges under tight time constraints. Evelyn circulated among the groups, offering guidance, asking questions, and quietly observing interactions. She noticed early signs of tension between junior and senior personnel. Some younger soldiers deferred excessively to their superiors, afraid of making mistakes, while some experienced soldiers overcorrected, taking charge without considering the input of others. Evelyn approached these groups tactfully, demonstrating techniques, asking questions, and encouraging mutual respect. Slowly, the dynamic began to shift. Hesitation was replaced by confidence, friction by collaboration. Daniel's team struggled initially. He was accustomed to issuing commands, but Evelyn encouraged him to listen more than he spoke. "Daniel," she said quietly during a brief pause, "lead, yes, but guide also. Don't just tell them what to do. Help them see the solution, and they will follow willingly." Her words struck him. He realized that leadership could be subtle, influential without forceful authority, and effective without ego. The next hour was filled with physically demanding drills, strategy exercises, and problem-solving challenges. Evelyn worked alongside her soldiers, lifting crates, adjusting ropes, and demonstrating techniques with precision. Unlike many officers, she did not delegate all action to others. Instead, she led by example, showing that competence and humility could coexist. Soldiers began to emulate her, working harder, communicating better, and taking initiative. Evelyn also recognized the importance of mentorship. She paired experienced soldiers with newer recruits, emphasizing knowledge transfer and support. One young sailor struggled to assemble a temporary communications post. Evelyn knelt beside him, showing how to align components correctly while explaining why each step mattered. The recruit's face lit up with understanding, his confidence growing with each instruction. Daniel watched from nearby, impressed by her ability to combine technical skill with encouragement and patience. After the morning exercises, Evelyn held a team debrief. Soldiers gathered in a circle, mud-streaked but energized. She began by asking them to reflect on what worked, what failed, and how they could improve. Unlike traditional debriefs dominated by rank and authority, this session was interactive. Soldiers spoke openly, encouraged by her respectful listening and thoughtful questions. One young recruit, hesitant at first, admitted, "I was scared of making a mistake yesterday. I didn't want to let anyone down." Evelyn nodded, acknowledging his honesty. "Mistakes are not failures," she said. "They are lessons. Courage is acting despite fear. Leadership is guiding others, even when the outcome is uncertain. You learned yesterday, and you will continue to learn every day. That is what makes this team strong." The soldiers murmured agreement, their morale visibly lifting. Daniel realized that Evelyn had done more than survive a storm or command respect. She was instilling a culture of growth, resilience, and trust. Her approach was subtle yet profound, transforming the base from within. Later in the day, Evelyn introduced a new training protocol designed to simulate real-world challenges. Teams were required to navigate obstacle courses while solving communication and strategy problems under time pressure. The courses incorporated mud, water, and uneven terrain, remnants of the storm, to test physical skill and adaptability. Evelyn moved fluidly among the soldiers, offering guidance, adjusting tasks, and observing outcomes. She noticed that some soldiers still hesitated under pressure, their confidence shaken by minor setbacks. Evelyn pulled them aside individually, using her knowledge of human behavior to build trust. "You are capable," she reminded one recruit. "The solution is in your head. Trust your training. Trust your team. And trust yourself." The recruit nodded, determination replacing fear. By late afternoon, the exercises concluded, and Evelyn gathered the soldiers for reflection. She emphasized that leadership and teamwork were ongoing processes, cultivated through effort, observation, and mutual support. "We are stronger together," she said. "Every challenge is an opportunity to learn, every mistake a lesson, every success a building block for the future." Remember, leadership is not about title or rank. It's about action, integrity, and influence. That is how we build a team that can overcome anything. Daniel, reflecting on the day, felt a profound shift in his perspective. He had seen her in crisis, commanding with calm precision, and now he had witnessed her fostering growth, mentorship, and trust. Evelyn was teaching him something fundamental. True leadership was measured not by authority, but by the ability to inspire, guide, and strengthen those around you. As evening fell, Evelyn walked the perimeter of the base, checking equipment, speaking briefly with soldiers, and noting areas for improvement. She paused at the training yard, observing soldiers helping one another clean up, sharing laughs, and supporting teammates. The sight filled her with quiet satisfaction. The storm had tested them, and they had responded, but now she had begun the more challenging work, shaping a culture of excellence, resilience, and unity. Daniel approached, hesitant but eager. "Ma'am," he said, I can see why everyone respects you. I've never seen leadership like this before. You don't just command, you guide, you teach, you inspire." Evelyn nodded, a faint smile on her face. "Thank you, Daniel. But remember, it's not about me. It's about the team. You lead because you serve, and you serve because you care. That is how we succeed together." Daniel felt a mixture of humility and resolve. He realized that his role had changed. He was no longer just a sergeant executing orders. He was a leader in his own right, accountable not only for tasks, but for the growth and safety of those under his command. Evelyn had shown him, through both action and example, what it truly meant to lead. As night settled over the base, the soldiers returned to their barracks, tired but invigorated. Evelyn reflected on the day, noting successes, weaknesses, and opportunities for further growth. She knew that true leadership required patience, observation, and adaptability. The storm had revealed character. Today had strengthened cohesion, and tomorrow would provide new challenges. The foundation had been laid. Under Evelyn's guidance, the base was transforming, from a group of individuals into a team capable of facing any adversity. The lessons learned in mud, rain, and chaos had evolved into principles of mentorship, trust, and shared responsibility. Daniel, observing quietly, understood that he had witnessed something extraordinary, a new model of leadership that combined humility, courage, and insight. The story of the Mud Admiral continued, no longer a tale of humor or surprise, but a testament to the power of action, example, and quiet authority. Evelyn Carter had revealed her identity, earned respect, and begun to shape a team that would rise to any challenge, proving that leadership is most effective when it is inclusive, compassionate, and courageous. The base had settled into a rhythm after the storm and Evelyn's formal introduction as Rear Admiral. Yet calm was temporary. Leadership, Evelyn knew, was tested most during challenges that came unannounced. By the next week, she began implementing a series of reforms to improve operational efficiency, soldier well-being, and unit cohesion. She wanted a base capable of handling anything, from the ordinary tasks of training to the extraordinary crises of real-world operations. Evelyn started with logistical reforms. Supplies were reorganized, redundancies eliminated, and procedures streamlined. Soldiers initially bristled at the changes. "We've always done it this way," muttered one veteran sailor, arms crossed, mud-stained from ongoing drills. "Why fix what isn't broken?" Evelyn approached calmly, kneeling beside a crate of supplies. "Efficiency isn't about change for its own sake," she explained. "It's about making our work safer, faster, and more effective. We'll adapt not because we must, but because we can, and because our lives may one day depend on it." Her tone was firm, yet inclusive, inviting cooperation rather than imposing compliance. Slowly, skepticism gave way to cautious curiosity. Soldiers began to see the logic in her approach. Her next reform targeted training protocols. Evelyn introduced integrated exercises that combined navigation, communication, combat readiness, and leadership in dynamic scenarios. No single soldier could succeed alone. Success depended on teamwork, observation, and trust. Daniel Brooks, now more attuned to her methods, found himself guiding younger recruits while following Evelyn's example. The first integrated exercise was met with resistance. Some soldiers openly questioned her methods, arguing that previous drills were sufficient. Evelyn called a meeting, not to argue, but to listen and demonstrate. She asked each skeptic to articulate concerns while she responded with clarity, respect, and evidence. Her ability to remain calm under scrutiny won over even the most stubborn voices. Slowly, the team began to engage not out of obligation, but understanding. However, her reforms weren't universally welcomed. Some senior officers felt threatened, resentful of her hands-on approach and unwilling to acknowledge a woman previously unknown to them, commanding respect from both rank-and-file and officers alike. Rumors began circulating, veiled criticisms whispered in the mess hall. Evelyn, aware of the tension, handled it with subtle finesse. She didn't confront the dissent directly, but created opportunities for them to succeed on their own terms. Assignments were designed to require collaboration, highlighting both strengths and weaknesses in ways that made resistance counterproductive. Slowly, the skeptics either adapted or were marginalized by their own reluctance to change. Evelyn's approach was deliberate, leadership through action, influence, and strategy, rather than confrontation. Midweek, a surprise drill tested the base in ways Evelyn had anticipated, but the soldiers had not. Communications went down, a simulated emergency required rapid deployment, and teams had to navigate mud-slicked terrain under time constraints. Soldiers scrambled, panic threatening to take hold, when Evelyn stepped forward, calm and authoritative. "Focus," she called, her voice cutting through chaos. "Assess, prioritize, move with purpose, and watch out for each other. I'm here to guide, but the action is yours." Her words were met with renewed determination. Soldiers began coordinating, sharing information, and relying on one another. Daniel, observing closely, found himself leading his team with newfound confidence, executing tasks with efficiency he hadn't known he could summon. Evelyn moved fluidly among the groups, offering guidance without micromanaging. She corrected mistakes with clarity, demonstrated techniques for efficiency, and ensured safety. In one critical moment, a young recruit slipped near the flooded training grounds, teetering dangerously close to a simulated hazard. Evelyn caught him, steadying him, and calmly explained what he had missed and how to recover. The team immediately adjusted, preventing further errors. By the end of the exercise, soldiers were exhausted but exhilarated. The drill had revealed weaknesses, yes, but it had also strengthened cohesion, reinforced trust, and illustrated the value of Evelyn's reforms. Even the skeptics could not deny the effectiveness of her leadership. That evening, Daniel approached her privately. "Ma'am, I never thought I'd see the base operate this way," he admitted. "Everyone's working together, thinking ahead. Your methods? They're not just changing the rules, they're changing us." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Leadership isn't about rules, Daniel. It's about shaping culture, fostering trust, and empowering people to do their best. Today, you proved you're capable of that." The challenges were far from over. The following week, a real-world emergency tested the base in a way no drill could. A nearby training vessel had reported an onboard fire, with trainees trapped below deck. The base scrambled. Chaos threatened as rain and wind complicated the response. Evelyn's calm authority became the anchor. "Form teams," she ordered. Communicate. Prioritize life over equipment. Move fast but safely. Soldiers executed, following her example. Daniel led one group, evacuating trainees from smoke-filled compartments, while Evelyn coordinated rescue efforts, moving between teams to troubleshoot problems and encourage precise action. Her hands-on leadership during the emergency was critical. She entered the vessel herself, navigating smoke and debris, guiding trainees to safety, and ensuring her soldiers stayed calm under pressure. Soldiers witnessed courage paired with meticulous planning, a combination that inspired loyalty, respect, and admiration. When the fire was finally contained, no lives were lost. Soldiers, soaked, soot-covered, and exhausted, looked to Evelyn with gratitude and awe. Daniel, catching his breath, shook his head in disbelief. "Ma'am, I can't even. How did you stay so calm?" Evelyn's answer was simple. Focus on what you can control. Trust your team. Lead by example. Panic solves nothing. The aftermath of the fire reinforced her reforms and leadership philosophy. Soldiers understood that competence, trust, and cohesion were more than abstract ideals. They were the difference between life and death. Evelyn's approach had proven itself, not in drills, but in action. Even the previously resistant officers acknowledged her skill and judgment, recognizing that her methods were saving lives and improving efficiency. Evelyn also emphasized debrief and reflection. After the fire, she gathered all involved personnel, discussing what worked, what failed, and what could be improved. Unlike traditional postmortems dominated by blame, she encouraged honest dialogue, recognizing both successes and mistakes. Soldiers were empowered to analyze, learn, and propose solutions, fostering a culture of continuous improvement. Daniel, reflecting on the week's events, recognized a profound shift within himself. He had moved from skeptical sergeant to inspired leader in training, internalizing lessons about empathy, collaboration, and courage. Evelyn had shown him that leadership was more than orders. It was about influence, example, and nurturing the growth of those around you. As the sun set over the base, Evelyn walked the parade grounds alone, surveying the progress. Mud still clung stubbornly to boots and equipment, but the base was stronger than it had been. Soldiers were more confident, efficient, and cohesive. She thought about the challenges that lay ahead, the next storms, the next crises, the ongoing work of maintaining excellence. Leadership, she knew, was a journey, not a destination. Daniel approached once more, pausing respectfully. "Ma'am, thank you," he said simply, "for everything, yesterday, today, every lesson." Evelyn smiled, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. "You're welcome, Daniel. Remember, the credit isn't mine alone. You and your team proved that courage, skill, and trust matter most. Keep building that, and you'll be a leader in your own right." The story of the Mud Admiral had grown beyond humor or surprise. It was now a tale of leadership, courage, mentorship, and transformation. Evelyn Carter had faced resistance, implemented reforms, and guided her unit through a real-world crisis, proving that authority, earned through action, was far more powerful than rank alone. Soldiers, including Daniel, had witnessed firsthand the impact of humility, skill, and inspiration on morale and effectiveness. Night fell, the base quieting under a blanket of stars. Evelyn reflected on the journey so far, from her first muddy encounter with Sergeant Brooks, through the storm, the reveal, and the recent crisis. Leadership, she thought, was about more than orders or drills. It was about people, trust, and action. She had tested herself, tested her soldiers, and they had grown together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The morning sun rose over Norfolk Naval Base, casting a golden glow on the mud-streaked parade grounds and the now efficiently organized training areas. Weeks had passed since the storm that first tested the base, and even longer since Daniel Brooks had unwittingly smeared mud on Evelyn Carter's face. Yet the story of that moment had evolved from humor to legend. Soldiers whispered about the mud Admiral, a tale blending chaos, courage, and humility. But today was not about legend. It was about consolidation, reflection, and the lasting impact of true leadership. Evelyn strode across the parade ground, her uniform pristine, demeanor calm yet commanding. She paused at the edge of the training yards, observing her soldiers as they moved through their drills with precision and confidence. Recruits who had once hesitated now acted decisively. Veterans who had doubted her reforms now collaborated seamlessly. The transformation was tangible. What had begun as scattered chaos had become a cohesive, disciplined, and resilient unit. Daniel Brooks approached, boots crunching on gravel, face smeared faintly with mud from a recent drill, a small, humorous echo of their first encounter. "Ma'am," he said, respect evident in his tone. I just wanted to say." Seeing the base now, seeing everyone work together. "It's incredible. You've changed everything." Evelyn smiled faintly. "It's not just me, Daniel. Leadership isn't about one person. It's about action, example, and nurturing the growth of others. You've grown too, in courage, judgment, and teamwork. That's the real success." Daniel nodded, silently acknowledging the weight of her words. He had come a long way from the skeptical sergeant who had underestimated her. Today's agenda was a final evaluation exercise, designed to test everything the base had learned: teamwork, leadership, strategy, and adaptability. Evelyn had orchestrated a complex simulation, a multi-stage rescue and logistics operation with obstacles, communication challenges, and variable conditions. The storm, now a distant memory, had been replaced by controlled chaos, engineered to test the limits of her team. Daniel's unit was first. They navigated a mud-slicked obstacle course, coordinating under simulated emergencies, communicating through disrupted channels, and improvising solutions when plans failed. Evelyn observed from multiple vantage points, offering subtle guidance, but never intervening unnecessarily. Her philosophy was clear: let them act, let them grow, let them lead. The simulation intensified. A sudden structural collapse was enacted. Crates toppled, debris blocked paths, and recruits had to move quickly to secure both equipment and personnel. Daniel found himself issuing orders confidently, recalling Evelyn's lessons. Act decisively, empower your team, and trust their judgment. For the first time, he realized he wasn't following someone else's lead. He was leading in his own right, guided by the example she had set. Evelyn moved among the soldiers fluidly, observing, noting, and occasionally intervening with precision. She helped redirect a team that had miscommunicated, calmly demonstrating the proper technique for securing equipment and encouraging collaboration. She noticed that even the previously resistant officers had integrated her philosophy into their leadership, quietly, efficiently, and effectively. Her reforms had taken root. After hours of drills and challenges, the simulation concluded. Exhausted but exhilarated, the soldiers gathered for a reflection session. Evelyn addressed them with her usual calm authority, her voice resonant yet gentle. Today wasn't about winning or losing, she said. It was about growth, adaptation, and teamwork. Every mistake was a lesson. Every success was a testament to trust and collaboration. Leadership isn't a title. It's action. Courage isn't absence of fear. It's choice. And respect isn't demanded. It's earned. Today, you've earned all three. Applause rippled through the ranks. Soldiers who had once doubted, hesitated, or resisted now felt pride, not just in their own achievements, but in the cohesion and resilience of the unit. Daniel looked around at his team, at the younger recruits he had guided, and felt a surge of accomplishment. He realized Evelyn's influence had permeated every aspect of the base, shaping not just procedures, but people. Later, in the quiet of her office, Evelyn reflected on the journey. From the chaotic storm to the reveal, through reforms and crisis, she had faced both skepticism and real danger. Yet each challenge had reinforced her philosophy. Leadership is earned through action, humility, and empathy, not imposed by rank. She thought of Daniel, of the soldiers who had grown under her guidance, and of the cultural transformation she had fostered. The base was no longer just a unit. It was a community, resilient and adaptive, ready to face any challenge. Daniel knocked lightly and entered. "Ma'am," he began, hesitant, I can't thank you enough. You've changed the way I think about leadership, about teamwork, about myself." Evelyn gestured for him to sit. "Daniel, leadership isn't about being thanked. It's about seeing others grow, succeed, and rise to challenges. You've done that. You've stepped up, led with courage, and earned the respect of your team. That is reward enough." He paused, reflecting. I remember the mud. The first day I didn't take you seriously. I was wrong." Evelyn chuckled softly, the memory not lost on her. "We all start somewhere," she said. "The important part is learning, adapting, and striving to do better. You've done that." By evening, the base was quiet, soldiers resting after the intensive day. Evelyn walked the perimeter one last time, observing her team's smooth operations, efficient equipment placement, and mutual support. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing the storm, the mud, and the chaos had all contributed to this transformation. Her presence had become less about directing and more about sustaining growth. She thought of her own journey, the unexpected challenges, the skeptics, the emergencies, and the small victories. Leadership, she realized, was iterative, evolving with each test, each interaction, and each decision. The legacy she would leave was not just in regulations or procedures, but in the people she had inspired. Daniel approached once more, hesitating. "Ma'am, do you think this team will stay strong, even if you're not always here?" Evelyn smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "They will, Daniel. Strength isn't about one person. It's about the culture, the trust, and the shared experience. I've given them the tools, the example, and the confidence. Now they will carry it forward, together. Leadership lives on in those who are prepared to rise to it." As darkness settled over Norfolk, the base gleamed faintly under the stars. Soldiers prepared for evening routines, sharing laughter, stories, and camaraderie. Daniel looked around, the weight of responsibility settled comfortably on his shoulders. He understood now that leadership was a journey of action, example, and empowerment. He had learned it firsthand from the woman once dubbed the Mud Admiral, whose courage, skill, and humility had reshaped not only the base, but the men and women within it. Evelyn stood silently, surveying her transformed unit. The storm had been only the beginning. Mud on her face, a humorous prelude to lessons of resilience, empathy, and leadership. She had revealed her identity, implemented reforms, faced opposition, and demonstrated courage in crisis. Now, the unit operated with efficiency, confidence, and cohesion. Her philosophy, action over title, courage over fear, respect earned, not demanded, had taken root. The soldiers' whispered tales of the Mud Admiral were no longer just about humor or legend. They were about example, inspiration, and transformation. Daniel, once a skeptical sergeant, now embodied those lessons himself. The base was stronger, more capable, and more unified than ever before. Evelyn Carter's presence would leave a lasting legacy, not only in procedures and protocols, but in the hearts and minds of those she had led. As Evelyn walked back toward her office, Daniel watched her from a distance, reflecting on the journey that had begun with mud, a storm, and a simple act of misjudgment. He knew that leadership was no longer an abstract concept. He had seen it, felt it, and lived it. And he understood finally that the true measure of a leader was not in rank, ceremony, or accolades, but in the lasting impact made on those they guide. The night was calm, the base secure, and the lesson clear: courage, humility, action. And mentorship could transform chaos into order, uncertainty into resilience, and individuals into a cohesive, unstoppable team. Evelyn Carter, the Mud Admiral, had not only led, she had created a legacy that would endure long after the storm had passed.